trade hall of Carrick's Prime had been designed to overwhelm. Arched ceilings of brushed alloy reflected bands of shifting light tuned to a dozen visual spectrums. Gravity sat at a carefully negotiated median, heavy enough for dense-bodied species, light enough for the fragile. The air carried layered scents, each filtered to a tolerable whisper so no delegation felt drowned in another's biology. This was where power met etiquette. Humans were still learning which mattered more. Lieutenant Marcus Hale stood 3 steps behind the human delegation table, exactly where protocol placed him. Close enough to intervene, far enough to suggest trust. His uniform was plain by interstellar standards, dark fabric, reinforced seams, no ceremonial spikes or glowing sigils. It marked him as security, nothing more. That, Marcus knew, was already a disadvantage. Across the hall, Ambassador Zelthara of the Virexi drifted like a living sculpture, her elongated frame supported by a gravitic harness disguised as jewelry. Her skin shimmered in slow waves of teal and gold, bioluminescent patterns shifting to signal status, confidence, and, at the moment, amusement. The Virexi were not openly hostile. They were worse. They were condescending. Among their kind, dominance was subtle and constant. A hand placed where it didn't belong, a tap delivered just hard enough to test reactions, a step into another's personal space to see who yielded. It was considered a civil way to sort hierarchies without bloodshed. Humans had been briefed on this. What the briefings could not convey was how deliberate it felt. Zelthara drifted closer to the human delegation under the pretense of observing trade documents. Her attendants fanned out behind her, forming a loose crescent, supportive, watchful. Marcus tracked the movement from the corner of his eye, posture unchanged. The first touch came lightly. A single-jointed finger tapped his shoulder, almost playful. Marcus did nothing. He kept his gaze forward, jaw relaxed, breathing steady. In human terms, this was patience. In Virexi terms, it was submission. A ripple of color passed through Zelthara's skin. Satisfaction. She circled him slowly, close enough that Marcus could hear the faint hum of her harness. "Human," she said, her voice translated into smooth, lilting tones. "Do your kind always place unarmed sentinels at your leaders' backs?" Marcus turned his head just enough to acknowledge her. "I'm armed," he replied calmly. "And this is a diplomatic space." Another tap followed, harder this time, just below his collarbone. Marcus felt it. He chose not to show it. Several nearby delegations paused their conversations. A scaled merchant leaned back to get a better view. An insectoid envoy stilled its antennae. The trade hall was very good at pretending not to notice tension, but curiosity always leaked through. Zelthara's colors brightened. "You do not flinch," she observed. "Impressive, or ignorant." "Ambassador," Marcus said evenly, "please don't touch me." The translator rendered his words with polite firmness, the closest equivalent it could manage. The Virexi attendants emitted soft clicks, amused. Zelthara tilted her head, studying him as one might examine a tool of uncertain quality. "Among my people," she said, "continued contact establishes rank. You have not yet yielded." She tapped him again, this time sharper, right on the forearm. Marcus's fingers curled once, then relaxed. Inside, he counted. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. Human restraint was not passive. It was active, continuous, exhausting. "Ambassador," he said, voice low but clear, "this is your second warning." Her bioluminescence flared, a bright pulse of gold that drew more eyes. "Warnings," she replied, "are issued by those with leverage." The third poke came quickly, deliberately invasive, pressing into muscle. The sensation snapped something into focus. Not rage, not panic, but certainty. The hall quieted. Even species unfamiliar with human behavior sensed the shift. Marcus turned fully now, facing her squarely. He was shorter than Zelthara, denser, grounded by gravity she barely felt. His expression was calm, but no longer accommodating. "Final warning," he said. Zelthara smiled, her skin patterns blooming in triumphant color. To her, this was victory unfolding exactly as expected. She raised her hand again, not hurried, not aggressive. Confident, the poke landed, and with it the line was crossed. Marcus moved, not fast enough to look like an attack, not slow enough to invite interruption. His hand closed around her wrist with controlled pressure, fingers finding leverage points instinctively. The contact alone sent a visible shock through Zelthara's bioluminescence as her harness compensated for the sudden loss of balance. Gasps rippled through the hall. Marcus leaned in just enough to be unmistakable, close enough that she could see his eyes clearly, steady, focused, utterly uninterested in spectacle. "This," he said quietly, "is the consequence." He bit her forearm. The action was brief, precise. A clean bite through the tough outer membrane, enough to cause sharp pain, enough to leave a mark that would not be ignored. He released immediately and stepped back, hands open, posture neutral. For half a second, the universe seemed to pause. Then Zelthara screamed. Her bioluminescence flashed chaotically as she recoiled, attendants rushing forward, voices overlapping in alarm. Security drones twitched, uncertain which escalation protocol applied. Trade delegates stared openly now, no longer pretending disinterest. Marcus stood where he was, breathing controlled, eyes alert. "I asked you to stop," he said clearly, for everyone to hear. "You didn't." The hall buzzed with shocked whispers. Among the Virexi, a bite was not merely an injury. It was a declaration, and every species present understood that something fundamental had just shifted before the consequences even began to unfold. For several heartbeats after Zelthara's scream, the trade hall of Carix Prime existed in a state of suspended disbelief. Security systems flickered between threat protocols, unable to classify what had just occurred. No energy weapons had been discharged, no lethal force registered. Yet the social fabric of the hall, carefully balanced through centuries of interspecies negotiation, had been torn cleanly down the middle. Zelthara staggered back, her gravitic harness flaring as it struggled to stabilize her. Her bioluminescent skin pulsed erratically, colors clashing in patterns that signaled pain, shock, and something far more dangerous among the Virexi: loss of dominance. Her attendants rushed to her side, hands hovering but not touching, their own light patterns dimmed in uncertainty. They were trained for trade disputes, for verbal sparring, even for ritualized intimidation. They were not trained for this. Marcus Hale remained exactly where he was. Hands open, feet planted, breathing slow. From an outside perspective, it looked as if nothing had changed. But every experienced delegate in the hall felt it, the invisible shift from performance to consequence. "You," Zelthara hissed, translator struggling to smooth the jagged edges of her voice. "You assaulted a ranking envoy of the Virexi Concord." Marcus inclined his head slightly. Not a bow, an acknowledgement. "You initiated repeated physical contact after being warned," he replied. "Under human doctrine, that constitutes aggression." A murmur spread like static through the crowd. Several species began frantically cross-referencing cultural databases. Others watched the Virexi reactions instead, because that, right now, mattered more. An elder Virexi delegate stepped forward, his skin patterns shifting into a controlled, authoritative spectrum. He was older, thicker-framed, his harness ornate with symbols of long-established rank. His gaze moved first to Zelthara's wounded arm, then to Marcus. He froze, not in fear, but in recognition. The bite mark was unmistakable. Among the Virexi, biting was not an act of rage or savagery. It was reserved for one purpose only: the assertion of undeniable status when all other signals had failed. The elder turned slowly to the assembled hall. "The exchange," he said, voice resonant and carefully measured, "is concluded." Zelthara whirled on him, bioluminescence flaring in disbelief. "Elder, he defied me!" The elder's patterns shifted sharply, command overriding protest. "You tested a boundary," he said, "and lost." The words hit harder than any security intervention could have. Zelthara's light dimmed. Across the hall, tension began to bleed out of rigid postures. Security drones powered down incrementally. Delegates resumed breathing they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Marcus felt it too, the moment passing, the danger receding. He didn't relax yet. He'd learned long ago that consequences often arrived late. The elder faced Marcus directly. "Human," he said, "you asserted dominance in a manner recognized by my people." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "I asserted a boundary." A flicker of something like respect crossed the elder's bioluminescence. "Functionally," the elder replied, "they are sometimes the same." A pause. Then, to the astonishment of half the room, The elder inclined his head. "On behalf of the Virexi Concord," he said, "I acknowledge the validity of the response." The translator rendered the words twice to ensure accuracy. The trade hall erupted, not in noise but in data bursts, whispered exchanges, frantic updates sent to distant capitals. Cultural assumptions collapsed in real time. Humans were not prey. They were not passive. They were something far more unsettling. Marcus stepped back into position behind the human delegation, as if nothing had happened. The human ambassador beside him didn't look up from her tablet, but her voice came quietly through the comm. "You okay?" "Yes, ma'am." "Report later." "Yes, ma'am." Business resumed, slowly, awkwardly, but undeniably resumed. Contracts were discussed, tariffs renegotiated, but every interaction now carried a subtle recalibration. Where humans had once been crowded, they were now given space. Where casual touches had been common, appendages stayed politely withdrawn. Zelthera remained silent for the rest of the session, her arm wrapped in a shimmering field as MedTech worked discreetly. She did not look at Marcus again, but others did. A lot of others. As the session adjourned and delegates began to disperse, Marcus felt the accumulated weight of attention finally lift. He exhaled fully for the first time since the incident. In the corridor beyond the hall, the elder Virexi approached him once more, attendants hanging back respectfully. "You should know," the elder said, "that among my people dominance is rarely challenged directly." Marcus nodded. "Among mine, neither is consent." The elder considered this. "Then perhaps," he said slowly, "our cultures are not as incompatible as assumed." He extended a hand, not to touch but to gesture in acknowledgement. Marcus returned the gesture. As they parted, Marcus caught sight of a dozen other species quietly updating their internal threat models. Not upward in aggression, but sideways in complexity. Humanity had not shown strength through weapons or fleets. They had shown it through limits. And in the trade halls, council chambers, and border stations of the galaxy, a new understanding took root. Humans did not seek dominance. But if pushed, if ignored, if disrespected, they would enforce their boundaries in ways no one forgot. And the galaxy, wiser now, learned to stop poking.